Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is June 14, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today with Robert Morgan Fisher. Where in the heck are you calling in from, Robert?
Woodland Hills.
Woodland Hills. How cool is that? The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Knowledge.
Oh, I like that. I rarely get that word. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Oh, it's a good one. Through the written word.
Yeah. Did you become a reader because one, your parents told you to, two, because they did it as an example, or three, on your own?
All three, actually. My mother read to me, and then when I had kids of my own, both her and my dad said, make sure you read to them early.
Yeah.
And so my mother was always reading, like a book a week. And so I inherited that. When I was like 8, she would feed me books that were like way beyond me, like John Barth, Giles Goat Boy. I couldn't even begin to make sense of it, and Catcher in the Rye, and even though I kind of gave up on them, and it was like, went back to my Hardy Boys or Tom Sawyer or whatever.
Yeah.
I it planted a seed,
Yeah.
and I look back on that, with a lot of fondness for my mom for doing that and just kind of pushing me that way.
Great mother. So, why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Oh, survival for one
Yeah.
thing, and also it empowers people. And the human nature is to quest for power.
Yeah.
And lately, we're in a phase in this country where power is defined by wealth. But I'm not one of those people. I think
Yeah.
power is about knowing things and intellectual curiosity, and
Very good. Do you
and
think
humility.
humility? Yeah, really. I love that word. Thank you. You're a wordsmith indeed. So, is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
Innate.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why there's so many conspiracy theorists out there. They think they're getting information. It satisfies an innate need in them to do
Yeah.
that. But the fact is, they haven't been taught to think critically.
Yeah. Critical thinking. Do thoughts create emotions?
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
Repeat that again.
I don't know what I think until I
Hmm. Contemplate and investigate.
contemplate and investigate. Well, that is great because McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. And Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
Hmm.
Contemplate and investigate. That's beautiful. Can humans think without language?
Boy, that's a good one, because there's so many people that just love animals, right? I think animal rights are really big right now, but animals are all about pure instinct.
Yeah.
And so, if you define thinking, I've thought about this a lot, because uh, we humans, we use it. Writing is about love of language, right?
Yeah.
If you're a writer, they say, do I have what it takes to be a writer? I don't know. Do you like words?
Yeah.
And if you like and know words. So your question, I think is, yeah, I think that if you define thinking as just acting instinctively and rationalizing and calculating, right? That next move, what you're going to do, processing information. Sure, people do it without language, but it's better with language.
Yeah. Very good. Because Chomsky says a language is not just words, it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is.
Mm,
What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
mm. Boy, that's a really good question, because there's so much cognitive dissonance now, and rational arguments hold no water with people who are cultists. You know,
Yeah.
So what you do is you detach.
Yeah.
That's a big one, right? And try to say something and loving,
Nice.
right? To try to try to fall back to that position, because really what you're dealing is with is mental illness in a way,
Yeah.
right? So yeah.
That's amazing because Ram Dass said years ago, I'm having a real hard time loving George Bush. It's like, tell Americans, I'm having a real hard time loving Trump. Like, what else can we do but love the dude? But if you say you love Trump, you're fucking in trouble, you know?
Yeah. Well, there's also boundaries, right?
Yeah,
So
that's right.
I
Boundaries.
mean, um, it's this is a really good question, Jerry, and I've thought about this. I call it the it's not new, but I call it the new sadism, right?
Yeah,
We have in this country, we have a tradition of sadism, and
yeah,
it sounds really harsh, but it's true. You
yeah,
know, we started this country, when we first hit the shore in 1619. And I know a lot of people are going to tune out going, oh, here he goes, 1619. But
yeah,
that is the truth. We have a long history. Humans have a long history of owning people.
yeah,
And what do the conservatives say now? They want to own the libs.
yeah,
That's a word, own, it was freighted with really, really serious meaning, right? You
yeah.
know? Yeah.
Well, is your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Oh, feeling.
Yeah,
Most humans, they react instinctively, and it's hard work to think, and we're
I love
naturally
it.
lazy. As a writer, I'm always in my students. I'm saying, hey, when people talk, your dialogue is too formal. Most people, even really rich, educated people, they use a shorthand. You know,
Yeah,
they don't say lot of, they say lotta. They
yeah,
don't say got to, they say gotta, right? And, and they use contractions, and I try to make my writing conversational. I tried to teach that, because
yeah,
that makes it more accessible to the masses. You
yeah.
know, yeah.
That's
So
like just listen to anybody on the street talking and they use the word like about every other word, like this, like that. It's like, all right already on the word like. Or you love this, my friend. I said, well, you just told me something in a half of a sentence.
right.
I says Americans speak in half sentences. He goes, deal with it.
Oh yeah, another bumper sticker platitude. Loudon Wainwright has a really good song about the overuse of the word like.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's good. He comes from a newspaper family. There you go.
love Laudo. I'm a big Laudo guy.
Oh, he's
David
huge.
David Foster Wallace uh, wrote about using the word like. He uses it quite a bit when he's in his interview, or when he's being interviewed, or when
Yeah,
his character says something. And he says most people make the mistake of putting a comma, right? Before the word like. No, it all flows. But I think
yeah,
what I try to do, at least this is just my thing, I strive to really eradicate that uh,
yeah,
overuse of that word.
yeah. Hello. Two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
Yes, very much.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you believe there's a soul, and uh, I, I'm inhabiting a soul right now. I have a soul.
yeah,
I'm able to communicate with it and use it. Um, Nobody knows what happens when you die,
yeah,
right? But I've talked to forward-thinking friends, and they say that energy has to go somewhere. You
yeah,
know, I do. I hope that's true. You know.
yeah. No, Paul Krasner says it well. He says, I only believe in reincarnation in one of my past lives.
I love Krasner.
It's a major field. Okay, second Turing question. Can machines think?
Very primitively.
Yeah,
Yeah. Even advanced. This whole AI thing. Let me tell you something funny. Saturday, I went to a memorial service for a big optical effects guy in Hollywood. Andrew Tucker. He was the stepbrother of a dear producer friend of mine, musician friend of mine, Galen Walker, and I knew Andrew pretty well. And his production partner got up and was the final person to speak at this very enormously moving memorial service. And he read a eulogy that he had, and he started. He says, "I punched this up with AI, the jokes with AI, as a homage to Andrew,
Nice.
who was talking about AI years ago."
Yeah.
And he would, I'm sure he would love this. So every time there was a clunky joke or something, he goes, "That's the AI." And it was one of the most interesting eulogies I've ever heard. And as a writer, I'm very wary of AI, and I'm in the WGA and SAG-AFTRA, and we have to get that regulated, just so that all sorted out. The directors did, but now it's the writers and the actors' turn. I hope they do it soon. But AI is interesting. So your original question, can machines think? Yeah, well, they can mimic thinking to a certain degree.
Yep.
Nothing like what's in between our ears.
Yep. Well put. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I think they go hand in hand, don't they?
Yeah.
When I'm working, I go, to what end? Is a constant question I say.
Yeah.
To what end, right?
Yeah.
What is this? And I read about, 3 books every 2 weeks. I take 3 or 4 books. I take them and read for 2 hours every morning, and it's always a mixture of classics and all kinds of oddball literature. Love short stories. I'm a short story fanatic. And I'm always looking for the meaning. Sometimes listen. Sometimes we just check our brains at the door and just enjoy something, for what it is. But even that, I think, probably has shades of meaning. And yeah,
it's interesting, Robert, because I got the question from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. He says meaning tends to last. Happiness doesn't always last. So that's a distinction there. But does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
Detecting it.
Yeah. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Oh, wow. I've never thought of that. They might be the exact same speed.
There you go. The poet Audre Lorde said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Yvonne Rainer responded and said, "You can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?"
For dismantling the master's house?
Well, here's the thing. Keep in mind, you put all the questions into the context you want. It's like me and you versus the wording on the questions. Because I open up a question with a cute quote, it doesn't even mean you have to apply it. And it doesn't even mean you have to apply the word new. It's really like, what tool do you gravitate towards? You can add what new tool, and you can add for dismantling the master's house. Yeah.
Wow. Language. That's really my only tool.
That's a great.
I gravitate towards language.
That's a great. What new toy do you suggest?
One of my favorite Charles M. Schultz comic frames is Linus saying that at birth, every baby should be issued a banjo.
That's good.
And I say that to my banjo playing friends, So what toy? The question is, what toy?
What new toy do you suggest?
Boy. New toy.
But I like the banjo is a great toy. That's like right off the bat. That's good. But
any non-electrified stringed instrument, I think.
Oh, nice. Non-electric string instrument. I agree. It's like, what?
Electric's fine, but for me, I'm an acoustic person.
Yeah. No, I like that. One of the old blues guys, they just put a wire on the side of the barn and just, that's it. That there was no body to the guitar back then. It was just a wire on the side of a barn, you know.
I wrote a short story of flash fiction that hasn't been published, um, where I it's about, some would read this and say, well, this is about Robert Johnson,
Yeah.
Well, no, it's about just about anything. It was inspired by Tom Waits' song Pony.
Yeah.
And and that line, I walked from Natchez to Hushpekina. I lit a fire by the side of the road. And from there, and I use that as an epigraph for the short story. And from there, it just talks about how this guy, a sharecropper, black guy, young boy, teenager, goes to the city, to make and apply his trade. And of course, he could, back in those days, guitar strings were very expensive. They're expensive today, but what a lot of them would do is they would take the screen from the screen. They would take a wire from the screen, and whatever suffices, So, and the Beatles, when they were in Hamburg, they would play for 12 hours straight without a break and eat sandwiches and pop pills on stage and just take any request that people would show. That's where they got their 10,000 hours, and which is an important concept to me. And there's a story about how, like, if Paul's bass string would break while the song was going, he would grab a wrench and take a string off the piano that was on stage, and put it on his guitar and just keep playing.
Nice.
That is resourcefulness and dedication, and that's just everything you need to know about the Beatles.
That's performance art.
Really.
Yeah, my friend got to sit in Paul's limo for a week in Japan and translate for him. So wow. It's like, wow, what a job. So what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Oh, wow. Someone stealing my catalytic converter.
There you go. Practical. So McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. Mm-hmm. So, Robert, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
It takes work. It takes effort. It takes calorie expenditure to do that. You have to. It's not easy to be intelligent and keep track of what is going on in the world.
Yeah,
which is a very important thing. And so you have to adjust your receiver, to tune in those waves. And I'm looking for them everywhere.
Beautiful. Do artists have moral obligation?
Oh, wow. Morality. Blake had his assertion, which inspired Christopherson quite a bit, was that the artist had a moral obligation to practice their art. And if they didn't, they were doomed to hell. Right. So in that sense, maybe, but the word moral and morality, is always gives me the purple fantods.
Yeah.
Up until Chekhov, short stories were all morality tales, in service to a religious institution, whether it was, Jewish, Catholic, Russian Orthodox, whatever. And after Chekhov, and that's one of the reasons Chekhov is such a hero, is that he said, no, it can just be about a lady with her pet dog, And he was the big game changer. So it is sometimes, and then again, this is all about semantic distinction, but rather than moral, I would say integrity, fairness, what's right. People. We're living in incredibly tumultuous political times right now, and people, often just cover their ears. They say, I don't want to hear about politics. no, there's a certain part of this. This is about patriotism. If you really believe in the separation of powers and what is truly and actually in the Constitution, so I know moral, a moral imperative. I my record label, which I haven't put out a record on that label. It had 3 records out. Is Imperative Records, and that was the and that was from the idea of like and the moral imperative of
Yeah,
doing your
that's
part.
great.
We have an obligation, so let's just
It's
leave it
like,
at that. I wouldn't say moral, just say an
yeah,
obligation.
it's
We
like Paul Bartel. You know all these cultural references in Hollywood
yeah.
Boulevard. That I think it's Jonathan Demme or one of those Corman guys. Their film company was Miracle Pictures. It's a miracle if it gets made.
There you go. There you go.
Imperative Records. That's a good title, dude. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Old ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's 2 kinds of nostalgia. There is restorative nostalgia, which is what Trump and Putin are about, and then there's reflective nostalgia.
Yeah.
Which says, let's go back and really truly reflect on this. But this idea that it was better in the old days, it was
Yeah.
not better in the old days.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, they go back and they say, what Tony Soprano said, in this house, it's always 1952, right?
Yeah.
Which is really, like what you're saying is, Jim Crow and all
Yeah.
the other inequities, redlining, housing districts and real estate stuff, was not better. Okay, so I'm afraid of, I embrace the new.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Oh wow. I had the earliest memory, and of course it's hard to say because there's no chronological timeline where you go, oh yes, that was it. No, there's no movie of your life that you see until you die, according to people. But I have a memory of sitting on an expansive field at twilight, and I was very, very young. I don't know how young, right? But that's about it. My father was, in the flew in the Navy, and in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that was about the time I really started having, set memories where I would remember things.
Yeah.
So the first place we lived that I, you know, remember things was in Rhode Island at Quonset Point Naval Air Station. We didn't live on the station. We lived rented a Cape Cod house on the water, and my dad was flying with John McCain, actually.
Wow.
And yeah.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Oh, it's a blessing.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just who act kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
So if you would repeat that, because you broke up a little bit.
Yeah, tell me someone within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Oh, okay. By immediate family, you mean my nuclear family, or just like
However you want to, however you want to define it.
My Uncle David, who is a really interesting dude. He's my father's brother, younger brother. They grew up very, very poor, and he got a full ride scholarship to Princeton, and he had no money, just money for board and whatever. And my father gave him a little bit to help him, get a sweater, right? And he wound up majoring in languages. He could speak 4 languages. And when he graduated, he became an expat. He married a beautiful German woman who they're still married, and they moved to Germany. He became assimilated there. And when I was 18, he came over and visited us and heard me play the guitar and said, no undergrad, you're about to go into college, and no undergrad degree is complete without a trip to Europe, and he sent me a round trip ticket so I could
Nice.
spend the summer in Europe busking on street corners. And that was a very defining, formative experience. I owe that completely to my Uncle David. I just saw him a month ago at my father's 90th birthday family reunion.
Wow.
And we had and he's a writer. He's written a couple of things, family history and so forth. And very smart guy and very sweet. And he was the first person that ever quoted Ram Dass to me.
Nice.
He said, "Be here now," right? Because I was so young and immature, and there I am busking on street corners and taking, trains all over, the continent, and just, exploring things and whatever. By the time I came back, I was a different person. So that's within my immediate family. Outside of my family, there was a fellow who named Griff Palmer, and in the 80s, after I got my radio, TV, and film degree from the University of Texas, we were in the middle of a recession. There was not a lot of jobs, so I took whatever I could get, and I wound up being a nightclub DJ for a corporation, and in Austin and in Houston, and they turned out to be kind of leaders in the field. And so for a number of years, I did that before I became a correspondent for MTV, and came out here and was on the Movie Time channel and got involved with improv and writing and so forth. But Griff Palmer was a DJ who they brought in from LA. And he had this incredible cocksurety, the thing about back then, it was all vinyl records. So we were, and when you talk about DJs with vinyl records, you're thinking about scratching, and so forth. We did a little bit of that, but we did other stuff that was absolutely crazy. We were known for, this group of DJs was mixing oldies, rock, soul, funk, anything, and keeping a dance floor going all night long and just entertaining people.
Yeah.
And Griff had been trained by listening to K-Rock.
Yeah.
So he brought that K-Rock ethos, to nightclub DJing. And I remember the first time I ever saw him spin records, it was incredible. He did so many inventive segues, because it's all about the segue, and not just beat on beat disco, rote mixing. It was like, we called it pop slamma-jamma, where you just pop something and just, all of a sudden you'd be going from like the Tubes, into Loverboy, into Depeche Mode, into, Four Tops, and there was an art, he said, "I'm an artist, when I'm behind the, when I'm mixing records, I create. This is my palette." And I'm like, wow, and he goes, I go, "How do you do it?" He goes, "Dude, I'm just going to slam it into Tainted Love and you're going to go crazy." Boom. Right?
What a great role model for you. Really, you could, and you're so good with words, Robert. I pictured it. It wasn't just words coming at me. I was in that dance floor. So did your parents raise you a particular religion?
No.
Do you pray?
I meditate every day, just kind of, I think deeply, and ponder and wonder, I guess that's praying,
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
"I'm sorry."
I get that answer. That is a funny answer. I'm sorry. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Oh, I don't know if evil can be personified that way. I think this is all about choices, and people make really bad choices. And I guess you could classify them as bad people when they do that. Watching for the second time through, watching the final episodes of Breaking Bad with my oldest son, who missed it the first time around and loves it. And we're in the part, where he's Walter and Jesse are, enslaved by the white supremacists. And and I was thinking as I'm watching, these are truly evil people.
Yeah.
I mean, what these people are doing is just terrible.
Yeah.
But with the question of evil,
Yeah.
when there's a famous story that when Adolf Eichmann was boosted out of South America and brought back to Israel to stand trial in the glass booth, right? They brought in a survivor of Auschwitz, and the minute he stepped into the courtroom and saw Eichmann there, he just started screaming.
Yeah.
We just completely lost it.
Yeah.
And after he'd calmed down and he was out of the courtroom, they said, "Why did you do that? When you looked at you, did you see the evil that was Eichmann?" And he goes, "No, I screamed because he looked exactly like you or me."
Oh, whoa.
Yep. And that's the
Gee.
truth. We all have the capability of to be good or evil.
That's the answer I love to get the most. I tell you, when people say we're all capable of evil. But Robert, the real hidden question here is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola so from the mob and the samurais, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you react to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Oh, there is a certain feeding oxygen to the fire sort of thing. And one of the best ways you can disempower someone is just kind of to ignore them.
Yeah.
I have had a couple of people in my life who a very, very short, quote unquote, enemies list, where I was so wronged by these people that I would, fantasize terrible vengeance.
Yeah.
And and two of those people are two of my closest friends today.
Yeah.
And it's very complicated, and without going into too much detail and so forth, that was a real learning experience. I wound up being in a position where I could help one, and I did. And from that point on, everything just sort of changed. And, I realized some of my culpability too.
Yep. Your enemy is your best teacher is what American Indians, indigenous say. So this is,
I like that.
Yeah, it's amazing. The Nassim Taleb said games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we really don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. Then someone said, well, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. Gregory Bateson, the anthropologist, says, if a criminal gets caught, does he go, oh, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, wow, I did something morally and socially wrong? So it's a lot of prompts, but the basic question, Robert, is, does punishment work?
Only if it's rehabilitative.
Yeah.
And this is a big issue in America right now. We have more incarcerated people than anybody in the world per capita. And this goes back to the new sadism, right? We these politicians and judges who are sort of feeding that sort of sadistic thing. But I'm a big believer in social justice. And why torture somebody if you can get, if you there's a way you could turn them around?
Exactly.
Right? And if you don't want to do that, well, you're just being impatient and a little sadistic.
Yeah. Amazing. So James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Wow. That's a complicated question. And I'll circle back and just kind of answer it this way. I'm one of those people who believes that memoir is fiction.
Yeah.
The minute you commit it to the page, there's a fictive aspect to it, and then that doesn't disqualify it or whatever.
Yeah.
One of the things that I teach to my students, I run the UCLA Word Commandos, which is creative writing to veterans with PTSD. I've done that since 2016, and they're now really acclaimed.
Yeah.
A lot of them have been honored and been published, and I just love doing that. But one of the things that I do, they call me Gunny.
Yeah.
I'm their Gunny, right?
Yeah.
Gunnery sergeant, right? And I say, and I showed up the first class with a high and tight haircut, polished shoes, and a press shirt, and bags of books. And I said, this is all high protein literature. Okay.
Yeah.
There's no self-help books here. There's no airport books, right? And Alexander Hemon, who I really love, said in an interview recently, he said, all self-help books are really propaganda.
Yeah.
There may be some useful things in there, but any book that purports to give the answer is propaganda. And the only real place that we can find the answer is fiction and poetry.
Yeah.
Because those two forms give us the possibility of an answer, right?
Yeah.
The possibility. That's the most honest thing that you could do, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I say, look, if you want to write genre literature, I will help you in that, And this is back when we were at the VA, and we could look across the freeway, and there were these. You could see Bel Air, and I said, "See those big houses on top of the hill?" I said, a lot of those houses are owned by people who write airport books, right? Your Patricia Cornwalls and of the world and so forth, and they're going to make more money in one book than we'll probably make in a lifetime, right? But and if you want to write that, that's fine. But I want you to have a firm foundation of James Joyce, of Raymond Carver, Flannery O'Connor, Joy Williams. Those people, are my heroes, and of course the famous poets,
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're doing great, Robert. That's such an important. When I saw you worked with vets, that really touched me deeply. But there's a joke there. I have to tell you. The guy goes into the bookstore and says, "Where are the self-help books?" And the clerk goes, "Wouldn't that defeat the whole purpose?" So walk us through, Robert, just briefly, your tipping points. Mainly let's just go into you writing fiction and being a songwriter and a music and lyricist, because there's so many other things you do. Your educator system is amazing, and we can go into that. But walk us through where you're growing up reading. Where did you go? I can do that. That's my calling. What's your tipping point?
Wow. When I was getting my degree in radio, TV, and my undergrad degree at the University of Texas, I almost minored in English because I kept taking these short story classes, and in one of those classes, I was the only person that got an A, even though all of my stories were given C's. And he said, every year I have a student who, after everyone else has gone on to get their engineering degrees or whatever, this person's still writing. And that person is you, Robert. You were never asked to read a story in class. Only the A stories were asked, right?
Yeah.
But you never missed a class. And if the only way that's going to happen for you is if you read, promiscuously. Just read. So that was a big tipping point for me. And I kept that dream hidden the whole time I was a DJ, the whole time I was a VJ, the whole time I was a comedy writer, in radio, and an actor and all these other things. I was reading and writing short stories. And then when I in the 90s, when the coffee house revival happened, and I was doing open mics with people like Dan Byrne, and
Yep.
and Seth Kurland, who is also known as Joe Hill, story songs really, and Daryl Purpose, who I co-wrote a number of albums with. He's known as, we became a narrative songwriter,
Yeah.
and somewhere along the line, the short stories, I started writing companion songs to my short stories, right? And then about 10 years ago, after I'd done 3 albums that I'm very proud of, and so they continued to sell and get played on the radio, I said, I'm going to focus entirely on short stories. That's my bliss. That's what I'm good at. That's what I love doing. I love teaching it. And so I just really kind of rededicated everything. And I still do music. I still get asked to play house concerts, and I love doing it. I was on the picket line Friday, singing rousing union songs with John O. Kennedy, and probably hopefully joined by Matt Cartsonis soon, who was Pete Seeger's right-hand man.
We've worked with Matt. Matt is amazing. No, and it was great because I heard you on KPFK, and I was like, I know who this guy is. And then I looked at your bio and I was like, this guy's done everything. But that was a good story because you zoomed right in on it. But I have to tell you, you really remind me of Sonny Rollins, probably one of the greatest saxophonists ever.
Yeah.
After the concert, he keeps playing in the back room, and the guys in his band go, dude, we're done. He goes, I'm still trying to work things out. Yeah. That's why you got an A, because your teacher knew you've got a passion for this. Yeah. I don't care about the content. It's your passion. And that really nurtured that. So then what is your tipping point to actually, I mean, you sort of said it, to writing songs. I mean, was it going from the short story to writing songs because you grew up hearing music? Where were you? Well, I can do that. Was
okay.
That? Yeah.
Yeah. Up until I was, like in my 30s, my goal was to be a singer-songwriter. That's what I was raised on. I mean, I have an encyclopedic knowledge of music, and I also have somewhat of an eidetic memory. So the songs that have, that have all these verses and that tell these long stories, I could hear them and just do them like right away.
Yeah.
And so I love that form. My heroes are people like Jim Croce and Harry Chapin,
Yeah.
I know I do a lot of their songs, and but that was but I when I finally realized, like, look at all these books you've read, right? And when I went to Antioch to get my MFA, I got Jim Crusoe as my mentor. The mighty Jim Crusoe, and he was, now there's a person who was an angel for me, man. He totally got me, and pointed me in a lot of the right directions. Actually, one of my most famous word commando, Brian O'Hare, who last year won the Syracuse Veterans Writing Award, his mentor was Jim Crusoe as well, kind of separately. And Brian and I are really, really dear friends. That's the biggest award you can get as a veteran for writing.
Beautiful. So, Robert, a screenwriting teacher told me a great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great film is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're writing a short story or a song?
Okay, Kubrick had it right. When you, and I know people are going to cringe when I say this name, but Roman Polanski said that, if you over-explain things, right, it's like, it's like you're giving someone a nice meal, and then you cut off, a little piece of the food, and then you chew it up, and you say, now open your mouth, right, and then you spit the food in. So the person's had no experience of the food for themselves. I'm constantly working with writers, screenwriters and fictioneers and whatever writers, to just say, hey, this goes without saying. The readers love to figure things out.
Yeah.
And the fine line there is not to get confusing. The minute you
Yeah.
get confusing, you've gone off the rail, right?
Yeah.
But what you want at the very end of whatever you're doing, whether it's a movie or a novel or a short story, is for the reader to go, oh, didn't see that coming. But if they go back and reread, they go, but then look at all the clues that were there. You
Yeah.
know, thank you, writer.
Well, Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your audience when you're writing?
Every step of the
No,
way.
your reader or your consumer or your listener.
Every step of the way. I'm not pandering to trends. I'm not chasing trends. But I write when I do a song, when I record a song, write a song, do a short story, or a novel. I detach and kind of do that thing where where you do a selfie and you just say, you switch the perspective, right? I say, is this going to get me to pay a certain amount of money to put my ass in that seat, or to go into Barnes and Noble or wherever and buy that book,
Yeah.
and I am thinking a lot about audience, and the audience is fluid. It changes. Right now, if you're a writer, you need to keep in mind, maybe not write entirely for, but just keep in mind Gen Z.
Yeah.
Gen Z is going to change the world.
Yeah.
I have two sons that are 21, and one is 21, one is 23.
Yeah.
And the younger one is like a rising star politically. He's a political science major. I love Generation Z. I want to reach them. I want to meet them where they are, and
Yeah.
I want to, and not to make a fast buck. Although, hey, I like to pay my bills,
Yeah.
but I want 40 years from now, people from that generation to say, hey, that old guy wrote something that meant something to me, in the way that people say this now about Bukowski,
Yeah.
and some of the other writers who seem kind of along in the tooth, so
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Bukowski's the most stolen book from bookstores.
really,
He'd be proud of that.
he's got a really good batting average.
Yeah.
I've read many, if not all not all, but
Yeah.
almost all of his books, and I'm always finding new ones. Like where did this come from, right?
Yeah.
I'm never disappointed by a Bukowski book. I'm always
Yeah.
entertained. I feel like I get Chinaski, that's his nickname.
Yeah.
Never met him, um, but he was, by the way, my writing students love him. My
Oh, yeah.
father loves it. When I read
Oh,
poetry to my father, I read a lot of Bukowski poems. That's his favorite. We always end with, we start with Whitman, start strong with Whitman, love Walt Whitman. And then, we end with Book, right? Oh yeah,
that's
Book. Right?
pretty cool, dude. So McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness. He says human sensorium. So knife and fork extend our teeth. Shutter and a camera extends our eyelid. Even like non-tangible, maybe religion or philosophy extends consciousness. What does the writing utensil extend for you? Whether it's a keyboard or a pen, what humanness does it extend?
Humor, through exaggeration.
Wow.
Yeah, the essence of humor. I teach a class in how to make your fiction, all your writing. It's called rub a little funny on it.
Yeah.
And that was a phrase that when I wrote radio comedy, there was a actor, writer, producer named Gil Christner, who is no longer with us, but I loved him dearly, and he was so curmudgeonly, and he would read something and he'd go, "Take this back and rub a little funny on it." Right.
Oh, that's what's the function of laughter?
Function of laughter. I'm paraphrasing Saunders here, that we laugh because the truth has just been revealed to us a little more fast, and mangling this. The truth has been revealed to us faster than we were expecting.
Wow. Truth revealed. That's Carl Saunders or Pharaoh?
George Saunders.
George Saunders. Sorry.
Saunders.
It reminded me of Robert Frost. You know, these icons of literature. Robert Frost, they said, actually Michael Silverblatt told me this. He said, they asked Frost, what does this poem mean? He says, you mean you want me to say it worse?
Okay, you mentioned Michael Silverblatt.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the heck happened with Bookworm. It's no longer on KCRW. It's no longer on the air. I hope he's okay.
Yeah.
I met him once at Beyond Baroque, and I
Yeah.
went total fanboy
Yeah.
because I love Michael Silverblatt.
No,
I was a voice actor, and so I'm a really good mimic, you know, and I did a lot of political voices in the 90s and so forth. And I do a really good Michael Silverblatt. And I did it once for Richard Bausch, and he goes, "Hey man, Silverblatt's good." And I go, "Listen, I do it as a homage. I'm like
Yeah.
I'm like Billy Crystal. I only do impressions of people that I love, and I love
That's beautiful.
Silverblatt. You know,
I had 2 encounters with him, but I asked him, what do you think of Finnegan's Wake? And he goes, there's a typo in every word on purpose. That is like, no, Michael Silverblatt's the godhead in literature, because every great writer ever would go on his show and he'd tell them what their book was about, and he'd go, geez, that's pretty good. Yeah, I didn't think of that.
Oh, yeah. I have so many of his shows burned
Yeah.
onto CD. I've listened to
Yeah.
them over and over and over again, and it is astonishing
Yeah.
how
But he did
many.
say, Robert, he said something that's so little, well, it's not creepy. I'm glad we're saluting him, because he definitely, I was a fanboy too, and I loved him. He said, I love reading more than life. It's like, get a life, dude. You know, because reading is life, but it's like you see him like, you know, so that's why he knew what was deeper in literature, because that's all he knew, sort of, you know.
Well, I mean, he is like the Godhead. You know,
Yeah, no,
sure.
I agree.
You know,
We have a lot in common threads, but this is good, because I wanted to go into a humor for 1 second, because you brought that up. And McLuhan loved to quote Steve Allen: behind every joke, there's a grievance. Now, don't even go into the word every. Behind jokes, there's a grievance. Any thought on that saying?
Oh yeah. There is I'm not a big fan of formulas, but there is Mel Helitzer, whose daughter attended Antioch with me, and I was a longtime fan of Mel Helitzer's book on writing comedy. So it's been since revised and updated and so forth. But he had a little formula called threes, and it was an acronym for target, hostility, realism, exaggeration, emotion, and surprise.
Yeah.
And the grievance can often be, found in the emotion and also the hostility, because hostility is really just fear, and sadness, right? So many comedy writers that I know, have had their, as Michael Silverblatt would say, their turn in the barrel. And I'm no exception. I'm one of the few rare comedy writers that actually laughs out loud in a room when I'm writing with I like to put my a joke up against my own actual laughter. Am I really feeling it to the point where, in one room they called me the hyena, right? But most comedy writers are just so dour, and like there was another guy I worked in radio with named Joel Douglas Perry, who is a genius, right? And he looked very much like Dan Castellaneta, very, tiny mouth, big eyes. He just kind of look at you, and you do the joke, and he'd do this. That was like rolling on the floor, wetting your pants, laughing. I said, I did it. Okay. Right. Or he would say, that was toweringly adequate.
Yeah.
Amazing. But the original question, sadness, it's no accident that stand-up comics have very thick skins, you know, and they've often been through trauma,
Yeah.
you know. Jim Carrey talks about his tough luck, you know, childhood. Steve Martin, you know, Born
Yeah.
Standing Up, you know, there's something about that. Humor gets us through, and um, you know, I told you my father was, you know, in the Navy. He did several tours in Vietnam, and a lot of our friends were POWs,
Yeah.
and the POWs, you know, a lot of them, an inordinate amount of POWs in Vietnam, you know, were Catholic. You know, they came up through that kind of really tough, you know, Christian brothers, seminarians, you know, and so forth. And included in that was this ability to kind of have this gallows humor and sort of, you know, be able to laugh things off, right? You know, some guy comes back and he's just like, he's been dead, almost been beaten to death. He goes, I think I'm losing my sense of humor.
Wow.
You know, and it's those little things, the guys that could do that, you know. McCain, right? I mean, John McCain. I'm a Democrat. My dad,
Yeah.
you know, and McCain were lifelong friends, you know. But he said the thing about John McCain is that he hated bullies. He hated them, and he also had a really subtle, evolved sense of humor, you know.
Yeah.
And a lot of those guys were like that. They had humility, you know, and especially after that experience, you
Yeah.
know. So yeah.
Well, Gurdjieff said laughter is the reconciliation of yes and no. But you might know a friend wrote a book on humor too, David Mish. I asked him, can
I
satire,
think I've got it right here.
yeah, can satire be destructive? And David said, that's the job of satire. But if me or you do a cartoon in a certain country and they kill us, some people think death is destructive. In Swift compared satire to a mirror in which people could see every face but their own. And like you brought up Zappa earlier, he nailed it. He said, watch the Nazis run your town. Now go home and check yourself. You think we're singing about somebody else.
Right.
So what is the function of satire?
Oh boy, this is such a good question, because I'm finishing up a novel right now that's all about self-satire, and effective satire is enlightening and healing.
Yeah.
Hackneyed or clunky satire is just mean-spiritedness.
Yeah.
That's why you don't see any comedy shows where you know, that were right-wing extremists, you know. Well, let me revise this. Okay, Trump and Hannity and all of those people, they are running, and their whole existence is like a stand-up comedy act, and but it's not even a good one.
Yeah.
You know, it's not Don Rickles, right? Because Rickles, you know, Rickles behind all of that was real love. He was actually,
Totally.
you know, they called him Mr. Warmth, you know, as kind of a
Yeah.
joke, but actually he was pretty warm. If you ever
Yeah.
met him in life, you know, he was like, you know, hi, very nice to meet you, you know, right? You know, but when he was on stage, you know, it was just you know, incredible.
Yeah.
But, you know, Trump, as he came down the escalator and stuff, you know, he had been the executive producer and star of The Apprentice. And so he had, you know, all of these, you know, this idea of this mean-spirited zinging, right? You know, that he would do, but there was no soul, you know.
Yeah.
It was all that was just attack, right? Without and giving people permission to be their worst selves. That's not satire, right?
Yeah.
That's just fascist, you know, that's just sadistic, right?
Yeah.
You know, and you know, in the threes formula of comedy, there is a target, right? You have a target, right? But you have to have, but in that emotion cannot just be cruelty,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, it's interesting because we grew up with like that was the week that was, and then Mad Magazine, and then you know carried on with Le Show by Harry Shearer. That was
Yeah.
fake news, and then they had to change Wikipedia fake news and call it satire news because it became this different meaning. Fake news was disinformation.
Right.
But, basically a lot of people, let's just even say your Gen Z sons grow up watching Colbert and Stewart, and they call that, satire news.
Right.
The bottom line question, does it more activate or more pacify people?
What? Satire?
Let's call it satire news. Does it more activate or more pacify people?
Activate.
Yeah.
Both my sons were raised on Colbert and The Daily Show and Family Guy and The Simpsons.
Yeah.
We had, we had absolutely no censorship about that. And so as a result, they both have very highly developed, senses and different senses of humor.
Yeah.
But no, they, I think it can definitely activate people. It's also it's a good thing, at the end of all time, people are going to look back on Colbert and Stewart and say, hey, those guys, they did a good thing. They spoke the truth, even though they were attacked for it,
And Robert, let's go into Ruth Draper, great performance artist, who said the key is to bring the audience up onto the stage and into the scene with you. It is they who must give you even more than you give them in the way of imagination and creative power. That sounds good, but how do you do that?
Wow. As a performance artist, and I have a lot of respect for performance artists, they're always pushing the envelope and taking chances. It's all about risk taking. And that writer producer that I talked about, Joel Douglas Perry, said to me, he said, we the only thing we really have to anything, he heard this from somebody else, but I'm going to credit it to him. All we really have to give other people is our vulnerability.
Yeah.
And when you do that, when you take that chance, and bring people up, that's why, we love the master improvisers like Phil Hartman.
Yeah.
Where, there's a fearlessness that goes in there. And before you go on stage, I was the musical director of Second City's Totally Looped, and I did extensive training in the Groundlings. And then I was in a improv group called Specific Hospital for a number of years. The sign before you go on stage at Second City says, follow the fear.
Yeah.
Right.
Amazing.
And performance artists do that, exceptionally well.
That you've anticipated the next two questions, but I'm going to ask them anyways. Leonard Cohen said, the only way you can sell a concert is to put yourself at risk. And if you don't do that, people know.
Yeah.
What role does risk play for you?
Wow. It's absolutely essential. You have to put yourself out there. I mean, are you, what Dennis Johnson, said that, you have to be naked, when you write, you have to write that way. Leonard Cohen, I edited Judy Scott's book about him and about her summers on Idra with Leonard. And I was the right guy for that job because I love LC. And, one of my favorite lines of his is, and I thought about it again and again and again ever since 2016. It's from the song Isaac, which is the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac. It's like 5 verses or whatever. And in the very last verse, after, Abraham changes his mind and doesn't kill his son, he goes, you people who are doing these things, you must stop it. Killing these children. A scheme is not a vision.
Yeah. Wow.
A scheme is not a vision. That's it. That's the whole thing. A scheme is not a vision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Phil Spector had a gun up to Leonard Cohen's head and he goes, I love you, Leonard. And he goes, I sure hope you do.
Yeah. No.
So what you described is that courage. What does courage mean to you now? Does it take courage to follow the fear, to appear naked, to have vulnerability?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
But
It's
what does courage mean to you? What is that?
well, it takes courage to be humble.
Yeah, I
You know,
see.
if you're going to be out there, I mean, um, there's one of my really funny comedy friends, Billy Hall, sent me a meme that, you know, those action figures that, you know, that people come up with, you know, and it was, you know, asshole at a party with a guitar, you know, right? And he says, "That's you, Robert." And I go, "Guilty as charged." You know, I love to go to a party and I love to play with other musicians or alone or do a house party because I'm a human jukebox, and I
Right.
really get off on that, you know. But you have to, um, you know, there's a certain amount of give and take that you have to do, especially if there's other musicians involved,
Yeah.
you know. And so humility is like a real important part of that whole formula.
It goes perfect to bringing up Second City. Viola Spolin, you know, who sort of helped invent that whole thing, being a social worker and doing role playing. She says, if the audience cannot see your struggle to achieve something, they cannot root for you to achieve it.
Yeah.
What role does struggle have in your creative process?
Oh, it's something that's been hard earned,
Yeah.
because I came originally as I was, even though as I was writing short stories and studying the form and stuff, I was, you know, I wrote for TV for a little bit, and I had a lot of movie things optioned, and that's all about storyboarding and having complete control of everything from beginning to end. But Bartholomew, and my if I may drop a name, Tobias Wolf, a dear friend of mine, you know, he says if he actually said this on Silverblatt show. He said, if I'm writing a short story and I write it the way I kind of pre-planned the whole thing, it's usually not very good. He says I have to surprise myself at some point in the way. And Bartholomew did nothing but surprise himself when he sat down to write a short story. He would not have any idea where it was going. And, you know, I have this Collect Library of America edition up there. It's one of my favorite things. I read the whole thing cover to cover. And some of the stories, well, quite frankly, you know, they're not as good as some of the others, you know, but that's okay. Same
Yeah.
thing with Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
People love to put down Saturday Night Live. It's not as good as it was first 5 years. Well, come on.
Yeah.
Listen, you know, Jon Stewart did an interview about Saturday Night Live, and he says it's very hard to do what those people do, to mount a show in a week, to conceive, write,
Yeah.
you know, cast, rehearse, and then put those things on live on television. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. I
Yeah.
love watching Saturday Night Live and all the various different casts they've had through the years.
Yeah.
And I like the sketches that fall in their face just as much as I like the more cowbell sketches. Okay. And what
Exactly.
is it? Who was the famous Second City teaching guru? Not Paul Sills, not Viola. Um,
They just did a documentary on him. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Not Del Close. Is
Del Close. Yeah,
Del,
he said you
Del
have
Close.
permission to fail. You have permission to fall on
Yeah.
your face, right?
Yeah.
You have to be willing to do that if you're an artist. You have to go out there
Yeah.
and just say, not that you just pull shit out and just kind of throw it in the wall, you know, and just and fluff it, but you follow your instincts and your intuition, and then, as they say at Second City, something wonderful right away, right, happens, right?
Yeah.
And but you have to go, you
Yeah.
have to
Well,
put
let's get,
yourself out there to do that.
yeah. Really well put, Robert. Really articulate and you're concise. I appreciate this. Ben Ratliff is a jazz writer, music writer. He says, I mean sound as they have long it has long functioned among jazz players as a mystical term of art, as in every musician finally needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note. So me and you could hear Miles Davis and go, oh, that's Miles. And Ben said he's fragile and pointed in 2 words. Oh, that's Coltrane. He's slightly undercooked and urgent. If a music writer or just a writer in general that you really respected was going to sum up Robert Morgan Fisher in 2 words, what 2 words would you go, he got it, or they got it?
That's so reductive. Um,
Yeah.
I'd want um, humor and real.
Wait, you broke up. Say the two words again.
Humor and real. Is it
Humor and real.
humor and
Beautiful.
real, right? Because
Yeah.
even the short stories where I go off on things a little
Yeah.
bit more of a slipstream, like my friend Brian Evanson does, where I just, magic realism, they call it sometimes, um,
Yeah.
the question is, does it feel true? Does it feel real?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Even
Yeah.
if it's like, that's absurd, but does it feel true and real? And that's what I strive for. So it's hard to kind of reduce it down to
No,
words.
you did super. That's beautiful. In fact, Louis Buñuel said, "I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it." So everybody goes, "Oh, that's not that one guy. That's bullshit. If I'm going to seek something, it's because I want to find it." So the cliche is the journey's more important than the destination. Why do
Yes.
we have to name or seek? Why do we have to name or seek a destination if the journey's more important?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's why it's such a letdown when you achieve something. You either get the award, you get the publication. There's this sort of anticlimactic sort of like, is that all there is?
Yeah.
Right. I miss, I miss the process. Right. And what, that old friend of mine that I mentioned before, Griff Palmer, one of the things he said to me when we were back there in Houston, spinning records, he goes, when you're in a golden time, most people, when they're in a golden time, don't realize they're in a golden time.
Yeah.
We're in a golden time, right?
Yep.
And I said, yeah, amen, brother. We are, right? So if you're writing something like this novel I'm writing right now, I'm loving what I'm doing here. And I don't know how it's going to be received, because it's self-satire a little bit, and I'm taking a lot of chances, unlike anything I've ever written, but it feels right. you
Yeah.
know and I love working on it. It's not a slog. It's not hard to do, right? I look forward to it. I miss it when I'm away. I'm going to miss it when I'm done.
Yeah. I spoke with Michael Apted about 40 years ago. I says, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? Most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922 in Paris, but basically in the 80s, it really flourished because of MTV, to the point where Marty Scorsese says, I cut my films faster because of MTV. Michael Apted said, because we've learned to take in information faster. And I asked this question with a bias. Can we literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Oh, I think we can. There are some books that I read where I'm going, well, I'm going to speed read this, and I'm a good speed reader. I have good retention, and I get it, but the secret is, as you're going through, you know, be watching out for those moments where you got to, slow it down,
Yeah.
get down, drop gear, because this is very, very important. Right here, we're getting to something right here. That doesn't mean that the rest of it should just be sheared away and struck out. But yeah, I really do believe that we can take in information faster than we usually do. And that was
Is it
kind of
is it literally possible for humans to multitask?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, they say you want something done, give it to a busy man, right? I think that we are designed for multitasking, and I'm writing a book on craft right now. And one of the first things I say at the beginning of the book is, if you think that you can't write because you have ADD, I say no, you can write because you have ADD.
Yes.
People who have AD or ADHD, they're multitaskers, right? That's why I tell my word commandos and all my students, read 4 books at a time. That way
Yes.
you won't be overly influenced by one author.
Very good.
If you hit a wall in one book, you can just pivot to the next, and then you'll come back to that other book. You'll get more books read that way, and it's more fun. But the most highly creative people I know, they, if you have ADD, that doesn't mean that you can't focus on something. It means that you want to focus on several things at once.
Exactly. It's good advice. What was the motive of the cave artist? Your hunch, your guess.
Oh, wow. This is such a good question, Jerry. Caves of Altamira by Steely Dan is one of my favorite songs, and that is, and I say the big struggle when you're writing, when I'm teaching people to write, is get it on the page. As soon as you get it on the page, then because of the technology now, we can go back and you can do the pleasurable process of revision, but at least get it on the page. And so those cavemen and women and cave kids, right? They were getting it on the page, and the page just happened to be limestone.
Yep. Yeah, I thought you were going to say storytelling. That's what half of the people say, and it's amazing you didn't. It's so cliche to say storytelling. I'm not saying there's no right or wrong answers, but Hollis Frampton said narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die.
Yeah.
Can you forget to die?
How do you mean by that? Like
that's good. A good question. You're answering a question with a question. You win, Robert. No,
can you put mortality out of your mind? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's one of the weirdest questions I ask because people aren't sure if they should approach it literally or metaphorically. So it can be approached two ways. It's just basically, can you forget to die? Then you put it into the context you want.
Well, the creatures that forget to die are like basically dogs and cats, because they have no idea that there's going to be an end to this, and that's why my friend Danny O'Keefe says, our pets stay with us forever. I really do believe that they go on to live in our souls and hearts. But can you forget to die? Well, I think that every artist who is ambitious, every person, especially artists who have ambition, they are the idea of the clock is ticking. Life is not a dress rehearsal. Get this done, right? I think that's something that drives a lot of art.
Yeah. Dreadline instead of deadline.
Oh, I like that. I've never heard that. I love that. I love neologism right there. Yeah. Is that yours? Dreadline?
Nope, I got that from Michael Simmons. You probably know him. His dad started National Lampoon magazine. You know Michael?
Well, yeah, Maddie Simmons. Yeah. I actually, I produced the 30th anniversary class reunion of Animal House. At Bergamot Station in 2008. Yeah. And Chris Miller was one of the few surviving writers of that movie and Caddyshack. He was there, and John Landis, Babs, Flounder, Stevie First. We had a pretty good turnout. Stephen Bishop, right?
Amazing.
I asked him if he wanted to do the Riddle song and have our Belushi impersonator, Mitch Berlow, smash a cheap guitar. And he declined, so I did it. Nice. And Mitch, he was the Blues Brother impersonator at Universal for years, right? Yeah. So he looks just like Belushi, right? And he just went to town. I gave him as a prop a fifth of Jack Daniels, right? It was full. And when he came out to smash the guitar, it was halfway gone. I said, okay, he's doing a little method acting right here, Somewhere someone got a recording of that. I look back at Stephen Bishop, and he was just like shaking his head going, I don't know if he was regretting that he didn't, go ahead and partake in that, or if he thought it was just all silly, but it was a crazy night.
Well, Robert, I asked for 90 minutes. We got 10 more minutes. So I hope we can do a part 2, because I only got through a third of the questions, and it sure would be fun. But I got to tell you, because I'd love to go into movie writing, film writing, screenwriting.
Okay.
I always say one of my favorite scenes in the history of cinema is National Lampoon, when the Playboy bunny comes flying through the kid's window and lands on his bed, and he goes, "Thank you, God."
Yeah, there's
Let's finish out with a couple more philosophical for this, and I really appreciate your time. This has been truly delightful and enlightening and fun. That's what I'm after, is fun.
right.
What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Compromise, because it can include conviction.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I got to admit there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right. You know how many people, 80% of people say conviction, even 90. But I really think if you can say compromise, it's something that touches me. It's hard to, it's interesting doing these questions for 40 years. Like, that's my first question. Basically, I got it from Christine McKenna. Remember, she asked all these great people all these questions, and she sort of got this ball rolling for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing how, one of my favorite answers was, what's more important, conviction or compromise? The guy goes, depends on what you mean by important.
I love that.
You've accomplished a lot. How do you rate these three elements? Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
Oh, wow. Ambition. Ambition, yeah. Not out of any egotistical sense, but it's just that, ambition is about goal setting,
Yeah.
and emulation and so forth. So, if you have the ambition, you can get the skill, and you have no control over luck, but luck is always a factor in every step of the way in your life.
Gary Player, the golfer, says the more you practice, the luckier you get. And it's funny because this is how I switch the questions over the years. I used to ask, is ambition based more on fear or joy? And I would like you to answer that in regards to not yourself, but your observations of humans in general. Is ambition based more on fear or more on joy?
It's best if it's based on joy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we are all subject and prone to fear.
Yeah.
And yeah, in a sense, you do have to follow the fear. But one of the big problems today is there are so many people who are just living in fear, and they're masking it with other things, arrogance, hatred, cruelty, that kind of thing. But joy, man, you've gotta,
Well,
the
that's a high aspiration, because 80%, the reason I changed the question was this: 80% of people would say, is ambition based more on fear or joy? They go fear. And so it was too simple. It was just either or. Then I read William Friedkin a couple years ago in a book. He said, in Hollywood, skill and luck have nothing to do with it. It's all ambition.
yeah.
And so that's why I switched it. And then sometimes people say, well, it's not it's not luck, skill, and ambition. It's necessity, or, a million other things. T.S. Eliot said, poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
My inner dialogue. Nonsense words. I am inventing nonsense words all the time. And my inner dialogue is often a persona that I put on that entertains me by mocking and sneering and just being silly.
Yeah.
I think it's so important to be silly, and my father used to invent nonsense words all the time. you know, like if someone was doing something, get you on a hanger, right? It was like, what is that, right? To the point where it's like, I would, I talk to my pets, and I go,
Yeah.
"Hey, are you a monkey man, mama?" Right? And the cat kind of looks at me like, I don't understand,
Can you speak English?
yeah, I might as well have said, do our actions have a moral weight? Right?
What's a hen weigh? It's like when they asked Andy Warhol this question, he goes, "Can I just answer like this?" Blah, 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 blah. And they go, "Yeah." So he went, blah, 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 But have you ever read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people?
No, I have not read Finnegan's Wake, and I've been warned off it by Michael Silverblatt and
Ah!
and Deborah Treisman, right? I kind of fear it. There is there's one of my favorite things in the world is the New Yorker Fiction Podcast. Okay.
Yeah.
And it was one of the first podcasts that kind of came out, and I have committed many of them to CD, and I listen to them in my car all the time. And one of them is Cynthia Ozick reads a Stephen Millhauser story, and it's in the reign of Herod IV, which is a famous Millhauser story, and somehow Finnegan's Wake comes up in there, and Cynthia Ozick, who by the way was in David Foster Wallace's top 3 authors of all time. He loves
Wow.
Cynthia Ozick, right? And she says, has anybody ever read Finnegan's Wake? She says, I don't think that there's anybody who has ever read the entirety. And Treisman goes, well, maybe some scholars and academics. She goes, exactly, right? And yet Joyce said, I'm just happy as long as it exists. That's all I care about, right? And so I would like to try that, to read that.
Well, I encourage you, because we've done it for 28 years in Venice, and now with the beginning of COVID, I'm in 4 Finnegan's Wake reading clubs. One in Austin, one in New York, one in Dublin, and in Venice. And it is, no, you can't read Finnegan's Wake, but you can read it out loud with a group of people, which is the opposite of what you do with a book.
Yeah.
So that's why it's a real challenge. And I know that Michael Silverblatt had some experience to be able to say that, because even this guy Michael Chabon, this big hotshot writer, he wrote that article in the New York Book Review, like, I don't know, 5 years ago. He says, I knew Ulysses is the greatest book ever, and I tried to read Finnegan's Wake, and I finally did, and I got it, and it is important. So it isn't that people have to or need to, but it's simply with AI. What Joyce did with the Wake was he invented whatever's going to be after the internet and disguised it as a book. So whatever the new, whether it's chatbot or Facebook, whatever new technology takes over, Joyce invented that. Zoom, Zoom online, this live, we're basically live TV. He invented live TV and disguised it as a book. So blah, blah, blah. It's an interesting thing that I would love we could go into. But why don't we close this part 1 out, Robert? Because again, this has been so, and it's related to this subject we're on. 2 of my film heroes have a mantra. George Manupelli says, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says, there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor, the great jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me.
Right.
So is art making more self-expression, or more you're a vehicle for whatever technology, cultures, and environments are dominant?
Oh, I think it's self-expression,
Yeah.
and the technology is just a tool, that makes it change. And this kind of relates to the previous question a little bit. I tell my writers, we don't write words, we write pictures.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know enough about Finnegan's Wake, to be able to talk critically about it at all. except, rumors that I mentioned that I've heard.
Yeah.
But when I try to read it, and I will, right, at some point, I will be saying, what pictures are these words showing me?
Yeah. No, that's good. In fact, you take a page and read a half a page with your sons and have everybody read one line. And you have to be looking at the text and hearing the other person mispronunciate the gobbledygook words.
Yeah.
So then you're tuned into what is reading doing to you.
Yeah.
See, but the hidden question to the last question, Robert, is can art making be egoless?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you probably want to strive to subjugate, the ego and just be in the moment, be here now, right?
Yep.
And open up and channel what Cecil Taylor is channeling.
Yeah.
Right? Or Keith Jarrett or whoever is doing those spontaneous, improvisations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because, again, that question, can art making be egoless? 80 to 90% say no. And then about a year ago, a woman said, great art is egoless. And then a couple months ago, a woman said, it has to be egoless. So, there's no, it's a funny word to tackle because ego, one person a couple weeks ago went, do you mean bad ego? They meant, do you mean the word as bad? Like they think ego is a bad word. It's a bad thing to have ego. So
Right.
it carries a lot of baggage,
Right. Yeah.
this word ego, because it's then, another follow-up question is, was Freud right? And that's an endless thing. Like, well, here's a guy who comes along and defines this word that becomes part of our lexicon. And we think we know what it means when someone says the word egoless.
Yeah. Well, intuition, right? Writing is an act of faith.
Yeah.
The best writing is an act of faith. And actors, all an actor really has is their intuition.
Yeah.
Right. And I love that, forget yourself. Right.
Yeah.
And as an actor, like I'm talking like stage and film and so forth, I was too tightly wound, I couldn't do it. I really admire people who can. As a voice actor, that's different. I'm a good voice actor. I've voiced a couple of audiobooks and, and I did radio comedy for years. And, there's just something about that where I'm able to get into that comfort zone and just not have to worry about my own self.
Yeah. That's Shelby Foote said, a fact is not a truth until you love it.
Oh, wow. I like that.
That is like, you can think about that forever. Anyways, Robert, this has been truly enlightening and I really am grateful. And I hope we can schedule a part 2. It can be months down the road, give us some,
sure.
The gap is where the action is, the resonating interval, but
wonderful.
Really been fun. And thank you for everything you do working with all the vets. That is an amazing, more more power to you to help people. That is beautiful.
Thank you, Jerry. And I appreciate what you do, man.
Thank you so much. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, but I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever.
Okay. Thank you.